quite some time now. But I think to start, I would say that Vice President Kamala Harris, she won, she ran a remarkable 107-day race. And that's full stop. Um, she won more than, after only 107 days, she won more than 71 million votes and counting. And the former president got 74 million votes, down from what he got in 2020. And on many of the indicators, Attorney Lee, Vice President Harris won more votes in some of the swing states than President Biden had won during his past election. She raised $1 billion and she won 226 electoral votes. So let's start there. From my perspective, in terms of the analysis, she ran a remarkable race. And when we break it down to race and gender, in terms of Black women and Black men, of course, Black women and Black men understood the assignment. Black women voted 91% on behalf of Vice President Kamala Harris, and Black men voted 77%, 21% voted for the former president. And I think one of the questions we have to ask as well, Attorney Lee, is what prompted that 21% to vote the way that they voted.
That's a good start. The representative you're talking about is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, New York 14 Congressional District, and commonly known as AOC. But the second thing is that our call-in number is 833-653-3529. 833-653-3529. I see we've lost a couple of callers. You can call back at 833-653-3529. Well, start off, I had the first unscientific response that I received post-election was from 4 young men, African-American, between the age of 36 and 41. And they were at a close friend of my house, and they decided to sit out this election. And when the homeowners asked them why, their response, they didn't like either candidate. They were fed up with it, and they didn't like Trump, and they didn't like Harris. And what is still shocking is a lot of African-American men received that check. They thought that Trump gave them a check, not realizing that he actually delayed the process of them receiving the money by insisting they put the name on a government check. So it seemed like to me that despite all the information and all the advertisement and all the information you could see publicly, at least in that situation, Attorney Banks, they ignored information that's readily available. They ignored information about Trump and the 5 young men that he tried to have the death penalty, or his numerous discrimination lawsuit, or his felony conviction, or his assault on women, or the verdicts of judgment, can't get a business license. There was just a litany of things that made him unfit to even run for president. He, with his background, he wouldn't even be able to get a job at McDonald's restaurant. You have to have they do criminal background check, Attorney Bank. And so he's elected as president of the United States. It was just shocking.
Did they give a reason as to why? And what are their age groups again? I want to look at some of the statistics.
36 to 41.
36 to 41. Okay.
And they did not vote. They voted for Biden, but they didn't vote for Harris. That was the first 4 people that admitted that.
And these were Black men?
Black men.
And
And
we can look at some of the foundational reasons for that. The age group, I'm looking at Black, this is by age. It's not broken down by male or female yet, but by age, this is 30 to 44, which is 3% of the voting population. 82% voted for, this is Black citizens, Black voters, 80 in the age range that you just mentioned. I'm looking at 30 to 44. 82% voted for Vice President Kamala Harris, and 15% voted for the former president. But again, millions of, you stated at least 8 million. I've seen figures bigger than that of candidates that are of voters or eligible voters who did not vote in the election. And so had been focused on what we call, quote, low propensity voters. And these are voters who have voted in prior elections. Many times they vote in a presidential election. Some of the statistics suggested that if they voted, they would lean Democrat. But there was a issue, as you discussed, regarding these young men you are referencing, whether they would come out to vote or stay on the couch. And so that is one of the issues that was predicted, and that's why a lot of effort and initiatives was focused on how do we get the, quote, low propensity voter out to the polls. And I believe, Attorney Lee, we'd be remiss if we didn't address what is really foundational, as we have witnessed in this last election. You've heard me state on many occasions that 2015 was the first year that more minority babies are born in this country than white babies. And so we're fundamentally looking at a system, a structural system that is created. And as we can see, as we look back, 10 days later, we're looking at a system that puts white men on top. And so we have to, address that system. The system is working exactly the way it's intended to work. And we have to address those structural, underpinnings regarding our systems. And otherwise, we'll keep doing the same thing over and over again. We have to address issues, including literacy. When you say, how could people, with all the information that they received, and there's information, and then there are words that weren't even in our lexicon 5 years ago, right? Misinformation, disinformation. I think we should be careful about adopting those kind of terms because I think they're misleading. We have to call things exactly how they are. There's a lot of lies, that's the right word, being perpetuated in this last election. And so we have to look at a lot of different issues. That's why I was saying that it's going to take me a while to unpack the last election. But I think in some ways that we have a large education effort to undertake around literacy, around voter education, and not just 90 days before an election. We have to have ongoing voter education, civics education as well. There's a need for discussions around both uh, fundamental literacy issues. Um, and I think um, that what we saw in the last election, is grounded in sexism, racism, misogyny, and these are issues that we're going to have to grapple with if we expect any changes moving forward in our communities.
We had an interesting comment from Renee in our chat room. Renee basically stated that she was troubled by the fact that she underperformed significantly in majority Black counties. And her concern was, quote, let's not forget about Elon Musk and his billions and his Starlink power. And it was just an oddity that it seemed like to me that there was a great deal of enthusiasm. And I thought that that was a phenomenal campaign they ran. I mean, they put all
Such a short period of time, raising over $1 billion. One of the questions that's been raised is how that money was allocated. And we were inundated with television ads, right? But there's a question about, and I had raised this question before, as I was watching the election or the campaign over the 107 days, and we heard from, our illuminators, including President Obama and Michelle Obama. And I believe that Michelle Obama ignited enthusiasm with her do something remarks. She's just a compelling person, and she's getting calls now about whether she should become a candidate for the next election, which I don't think that she will. And that is not the point I'm raising. The conversation that Barack Obama was having with our Black men, I thought was a good conversation to have. However, my thought was always that the key to the election ultimately was turnout, and that those organizers, community organizers that were in community with our communities, those communities that ostensibly, Renee, you're addressing, that our vice president may have underperformed, you're saying, in many counties, including majority Black counties. I think one of your questioning, I think perhaps the result, but one of the things that I was saying was that um, it was those community organizers that were in community with our communities that had to turn out the vote. And that meant they needed resources. And I think a lot of resources were spent on, or let's just say a segment of resources was spent on, television ads, which we've got to take a look at. There's certain demographics that watch television, but we also know that there are other generations that don't watch television in terms of their major source of news, correct? Many of them, are tuned to social media where, it's filled with mis or disinformation and outright lies. So I think one of the things that we have to look at is how are those dollars allocated? And as we move forward, we have to look more, from my perspective, at a bottom up strategy, and that we've got to make sure that we're working hand in hand with, and actually our community organizers are actually leading and are the surrogates that we put out there in front. If we, as we address, the challenges that we faced in this past election. What do you think, Attorney Lee?
It's difficult without actually doing surveys to find out what I was given also in terms of updated vote totals as of today. They were updated, and it gave as of today, Trump is like 75,100,000 and Harris is at 72,400,000. So it's like she's now only within what, a couple million votes of where he's at. And the vote, so it's getting closer and closer in terms of the final vote tally. It's just odd that we keep getting these numbers updated, right? But the thing that bothered me, quite frankly, when I looked at the post-election survey, and I'm not sure how accurate it is, they said that Hispanic voters, 45% voted for Trump. Now, that was a shocker to me, Attorney Banks. I'm thinking that can't be right. This is the same guy, so you want to ship them all to Mexico or someplace else, South America, or any place with the United States, that he's going to try to get the military to put them into buses or trucks or whatever to get them out of the country. And that was a pretty bizarre response. The second group that I was concerned about, Attorney Bank, was the Pakistanis. They looked like 500,000 of those voters, which would have made a difference in the swing states, in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, of course. That swing voter by itself would have changed the election outcome. Those three states, Harris would be the president-elect. And those voters decided not to vote, or some switched to Trump, a person who just has a view that's just opposite in terms of what Netanyahu should do with Israel. You know, there's a terrible tragedy what happened there, and they blamed the Biden administration for what a national leader, just an odd response to me.
When we look at the demographics in the last election and we break down race and gender, to your point, Attorney Lee, Latino men, which are 6% of the voting population, they voted 43% in favor of Vice President Harris and 55% in favor of the former president. And Latino women, 60% voted for Vice President Harris and 38% voted for the former president. And there are almost 38.5 million Mexican Americans, over 5.5 million Puerto Ricans, and 2.6 million Cuban Americans in the mainland United States. And so Mexican voters voted 62% in favor of Vice President Harris and 33% the former president. And Puerto Rico, and remember those comments made regarding Puerto Ricans 2 weeks or less before the election, they voted 59% in favor of Vice President Harris and 37%. And no surprise here, I don't think, Cubans voted 40% in favor of Kamala Harris and 58% in favor of the former president.
Yeah, and what I see one of our callers, Randy Virgil, his thought was Democrat voting for Republican, but that's not actually what happened in this election. In this election, folks, with the numbers is that it was something very simple in terms of math. Harris received 8 million less Democratic voters than Biden, and Trump received about the same amount. So the Trump voters went to the poll and voted either in person or by absentee or whatever, and the Democrat lost 8 million and he didn't lose any. And so that was the difference in the outcome of the election. He got the same number of votes he got last time, but the Harris campaign vote total are 8 million less than Biden. And so you had to understand, we're on talking, if you take 1 million voters and shifted it to the 3 battleground states, then she would be the president-elect. And so don't forget that. Let's go to Imhotep. Imhotep, you got a comment today. I know you do, so what is it?
Yes, good brother. How you doing, Brother Lee? And to all the guests, thank you for taking my call. Toure, the former journalist for BET, and a number of the New York organizations said that he had evidence, or they had estimates, that there were 15 million less Democratic voters than it was the last election. Maybe those numbers are alternate because this was last week. Sometimes maybe you got the final tally. 8 million is hurtful. We cannot overlook the fact. It's tough to. You don't want to simplify it in these terms, but the truth is the truth. I've listened to a lot of Arab Americans post-election in Michigan and Wisconsin, and shout out to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which is liberally dominated, for shooting back at the Attorney General there for wanting to lock up women for even if they have a medical necessity to get an abortion. That was a riveting testimony. If you haven't heard that, people need to go on YouTube and Google Wisconsin Supreme Court against their AG abortion, and you'll see some riveting testimony. But going back to the election, we know racism and misogyny is a part of this country. We know it is. My mother is 83, and my dad did get to see President Obama. He passed transition on 2018. One of my late grandmothers didn't. Yes, she did. She saw President Obama, so she passed 2013. So I was hoping my mother and many other black women, especially accomplished women, simple women who work in factories, women who work anywhere, will see that this will come to pass. But we know that we have a European-dominated, male-dominated system that we live in. It's very, very sad. Some are saying that there was a low turnout here. 61%, I think, 350,000 in Marion County. I thought I read. Is that correct? 350,000 of the eligible.
No. Here's the thing: in Indianapolis, there's like 467,000 registered Democratic voters. Before the final tally, when I last looked at it, Harris had gotten about 205,000 of those. So, in other words, in Indianapolis, if you look at the numbers that Obama received versus Harris, she was about 45,000 less voters to actually vote than Obama did. And that's a real serious indication, and that's how it went nationwide. So for whatever reason here in Indianapolis, despite the best effort, the Democrat voters here in Marion County didn't turn out to vote
And I don't like. I did a video on my TikTok, Imhotep Centaur. I got TikTok, and I get a lot of people looking. And I looked at that map. That map is just bloody red. There's more blue on that map. Blue, which Democratic districts, people. There's more blue in Mississippi and Alabama than it is in Indiana and Ohio. And what I may have saw in Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota and Pennsylvania. If you don't believe me, go pull up the 2024 election congressional district map. Pull that map up. Pull up the congressional district map. That's ridiculous. And California, if Attorney Grimes is, California doesn't have anything to be shouting about. That blue is maybe on the coast areas. That red is split all the way from the middle of the state in. Nevada split from the middle way down. The only state that was completely blue with no red on there was New Mexico. So shout out to New Mexico. I wonder what they're doing there. And New Hampshire, I think, Vermont, and Maine was gray when I looked at it the other day. So I don't know where Maine finished up at. But that's ridiculous. The Electoral College has to be abolished eventually over time because it's set up for the minorities never to gain power. We'll never gain power. Look at that map. We'll never gain power. And power is the ability to control outcomes. And we need to control outcomes. Look at the judge in Texas yesterday that struck down Biden's overtime law, a Trump appointee. You see what I'm saying? So I just want to throw that out there. We're not going to overlook racism and misogyny, even amongst Democratic voters that didn't show up. We'll shout out to black women and black men. They have a slogan online. Don't blame us. Oh, we're part of the 80%, or we're part of the 96%, and everybody else, they're on their own. I mean, that's the way it is. And my mother, who's a very intelligent, educated woman, said, forget it. Let the deportations happen. Let the bans happen. People have to learn. They have to learn. They never listen to us. And this election has shown that. And thank you for taking my call. I really love you all. Thank you.
That's a great point. Many points Imhotep makes are great points, of course. But sometimes you have to let people have what they think they want and let them live with it. I'm looking here. Harris won Illinois by just 10 points to Imhotep's point as well, which is the smallest win margin for a Democrat presidential candidate in 20 years. At the time that this particular article was written, Trump had added just 29,532 votes to his 2020 total, but Harris had run over 500,000 votes behind Biden. And in Chicago's Cook County, the Trump electorate grew by just 12,448 votes, while Harris earned 350,000 fewer votes than Biden.
And so that's the statistic that I think is most telling that we need to focus on. Why did Democrats, these 8 to 9 million Democrats who voted for Biden, who voted for Obama, then vote for Harris? You know, it's not that they were voting for Trump, because Trump, basically, his vote total is pretty mirror what he got before. He got a little bit more, but not enough to win the election. And so it's just shocking to me. And so that's what we need to find out over the next coming months, to figure out how to get those Democrats who vote for Biden back in the fold for the midterms, because the next major election is going to be in 2026, when you have the midterm election, where you're going to be electing the House and the Senate. And so that is how you have checks and balance in government. Next time around, we should be able to regain the Senate and the House in the midterm.
Excellent points, Attorney Lee. And if you look at New York, and back to AOC, Ms. Cortez, Representative Cortez, and her reflections, Mr. Trump did even better in states that he didn't win. For example, in New York, the vote was driven by two demographics. There were more votes from non-white New Yorkers in the 5 boroughs and their suburbs, and a steep decline, back to your point, Attorney Lee, of Democratic votes.
And so the billion-dollar question is, how do you get the Democrat back in the voting booth? I mean, they spent a lot of money, and they had a really good operation. I mean, they had like 135 different points of contact in Michigan alone. They had people out there knocking on doors, millions of dollars in advertisement, but they did outreach that was incredible. But they still did not get the people to the polls to vote. And so one of the things that occurred is that people that voted in election each time around, which is not usually the focus, a large segment of those folks didn't turn out to vote in the election, which was shocking. Like people like me, we vote in every election, but I still get information, but we're going to vote in every election, me and my family. We never miss one, ever. Never will. Understand that democracy itself is based upon the fact that there's nothing more sacred than to vote or serve on jury duty. Nothing. And so because of that, we take it very serious in my household, and I hope everybody else will also. But you can't complain about government and the benefits the government provide for us if you don't vote. And let's
Absolutely.
take a call. One caller real quick.
Attorney Lee.
Yes. Hey, caller, what's your question? Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I actually have a couple of comments, and then I have a couple of questions. One is I'm the one that posted about, have you heard about the Twitter users and TikTok users saying that they checked out their ballots and they never got confirmation that they were received? And I've been hearing that from several. Yeah, and I've been hearing it from several friends, but I have a personal experience that I have relatives in rural Florida, and one of my aunts and her daughter, who is a director at a hospital, they checked on their ballots, and what came up was, we will be mailing out your absentee ballot April 2025. The thing is, they took their ballots in personally to the election office and dropped them off in the ballot box. So it was a weird message, and they weren't sure what it was about. And I asked them, well, maybe, are you sure that this is not, that they're processing your early ballot for next year, for when the next election? She said, no, they don't do that. So that's 2 family members that I know of, or 3, because my uncle also votes by mail as well. And they have come up with weird messages. So I'm not trying to say this is a conspiracy here, but there is something that is just not sitting well with me, that the numbers are not adding up and not making sense. Everybody, the Democratic Party, and all they said was, let's get Joe Biden out of here because he's too old. He messed up the debate. So they get him out of there, and they get a new candidate because they wanted somebody younger and more like, energetic or whatever. And you mean to tell me they sat back and didn't go vote? No, there's just something not right. We probably won't know about it. But my point is, moving forward, what we need to do is, I agree. One thing we can take as a positive, we won't have any rioting on Inauguration Day or any of that time because they got everything they wanted. They got the presidency, they got the Congress, they got everything they wanted. So now they have no reason to riot. They have no reason to be pissed off. So they'll sit quiet. What they're going to do is sit quiet, and they're going to actually have to witness what they voted for. And while they're witnessing this, they're realizing that they're going to be worse off, because when that 10 to 20% tariff hits, is going to make food prices and everything else even higher than under Biden. They'll realize they had it pretty damn good. So what's going to happen after that is that they're going to come back running to the Democratic Party, as they always do when the Republicans mess up this country, to ask us to help fix it. We have to be smarter. We got a congressional race that's coming up in 2 years, almost less. So we need to start building communities, tribes, go underground, start doing some groundwork and getting people together to start fighting for those congressional seats so that he can't run amok for the following 2 years. It's going to be hard. We're going to hurt. This is going to be painful. But I've already started forming groups and tribes of people who are non-MAGAs and so on and so forth to hit the ground running. I will also say one other thing. I've known people who worked on the Harris campaign, and I'm going to tell you this. The ground game was better than any ground game you could ever have had for a campaign. These people knocked doors 3 and 4 times in some of these swing states. There's never been a campaign that was able to do that. They paid their workers to go out there and knock doors, ask voters to come out. That's why I'm a little perturbed about the numbers too. They knocked 3 times on the hundreds of thousands of doors in just one state alone. Nobody's ever been able to do that. So there's something, I'm just feeling a little like there's something not right, but we can't do anything about it at this point. We just have to move forward. That's my comment. And I'd like to know what you guys think.
Hey, Renee, one thing that I thought was unusual, the number of bomb threats, like in Philadelphia, they targeted cities. And so it caused some significant interruption and caused massive line. But the loss of the people in line, there's a couple ways of looking at this. See, they have early voting almost in every state. And so what we do to make sure that our vote count is that we try to vote within the first day or the first week of early voting, always. I've never, ever been a fan of voting on election day. I've always voted early because I thought that it's such a sacred type thing until I may get sick. There's 100 things could happen, but by voting early, I know that my vote count. And that's what I think that's got to be the gravamen of how we go forward. Because here's the difference. There's something very important, Renee, that everybody's overlooking. In 2020, there was over 100 million folks that voted early, 100 million. And out of that 100 million, over 60 plus million were Democrat. Think about that. So before the election day, we had already secured 75% of votes we needed to win the freaking election. This time around, there was only 80 million people that voted. And this time around, I've not seen the final number, but it looked like that Trump had the same number of early votes, but the Democrats did not. And so I thought that was a significant departure. So despite the fact people knocked on doors, whatever reason, they didn't get their buttocks to the place to vote early. or on
Well,
election day.
I'll say I agree with that. The only thing I would add to that, attorney, is that this is a different profile of voters. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you talking? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, this is a different pool of voters from 2020. 2020 were people that were coming out of the pandemic and all voted that way. We had the most significant young voters to come on board who never voted in 2020, 21, 22, 23. We had a whole new crop of voters, and they vote differently. They like to go out to the polls. And when I was looking on election day at those lines in colleges, that was also encouraging that the same day voting was going to be different than it was in 2020 or 2022. And that, yes, most voters were voting like that, but since the pandemic, people are feeling more comfortable. They want to vote as a group and family and make it historic. I agree with you. However, this is not the same as 2020 voters, in my opinion, or 2016. What I'm saying is those who did ballots are complaining that they cannot confirm that their ballots were received. So we don't really know what happened with that. Maybe we did vote in the same numbers as far as ballot percentages ballots are concerned. But if you've got ballots that are not counted, have never gotten there, were never in the system, how will we know? That's just my opinion. And I'm going to get off and let you guys go ahead and finish.
Hey, Renee, there's one other thing
much.
as a point of departure on this issue. There's something very important that I don't want you to forget. In those urban areas, like Atlanta, Indianapolis, Chicago, New York, they all have one thing in common. They have Democratic mayor, Democratic council, and so Democrats control the electoral process in those areas whereby we had the biggest decline. So I know when the Republican laws, they had a lot of conspiracies, but I thought like here in Indianapolis, our clerk has done a remarkable job. You can vote anywhere. You don't have to go to your precinct. You can go to any precinct. And so they made it real easy to vote here in Indianapolis, very easy. And so if they made it that easy, then why on earth did we lose 240,000 people who chose not to vote who were registered Democrat? Why?
In Indiana.
Well, I would say, I live in New York City, so I'm going to say this. The only thing I would say about the Harris campaign is they made it about the 7 swing states. They totally made it about that. So everybody else felt like, well, I don't really need to go out and vote because, we're going to take New York, so, maybe I'll vote because I'm voting for the first Black woman that's running for an office and I want to be historic or whatever. But, New York is like, okay, we may or may not. We didn't have, they may have gone out and voted for the House or whatever. But New York City New York City voters didn't have House representatives that were going to make a difference. Our stuff was going to be blue anyway. It was the state that we had to be concerned about because all the outside, more reddish areas were the ones that are going to decide the House. So those people really needed to turn out, and they turned out. The New York City folks, and it didn't necessarily. But I would say this, that a lot of people I've heard from is like, well, why should I vote? Because California is, not going to make a difference. Maine is not going to make, so on and so forth. And the Harris campaign, I know they had a short period of time, so they had to focus on the 7 swing states. But that left a lot of people saying, let's just focus on the 7 swing states, even the states she got. And they worked their butts off for the swing states for her to win those. I know people in New York who went down and knocked doors and sent out postcards and stickers and everything else. I was one of those people because we focused on the 7 swing states. So maybe the drop in the blue states is not the issue, but my problem is DC, which is a mostly Black, voting area. She underperformed from Biden in that state. He got 96%. She got 90% of the voters. That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, that's just what I'm saying. Okay, so thank you for taking my call. I'm going to get off and listen to you guys. Thank you.
Attorney Banks, wow, she said a mouthful, Attorney Banks. What do you think?
Excellent points that Renee is making. I wanted to go back.
Phenomenal point. She's brilliant.
Absolutely. I wanted to go back and just reiterate your point, Attorney Lee, which is that the fundamental obligation of citizens in the United States is to vote in every election um, people died for our fundamental right to vote. The most important obligation of a citizen is to vote in every election, as well as if you are called to serve on a jury, to participate on the jury. But in terms of just top lines and addressing Renee's point, and of course, we all heard about fraud in cities across the nation. We heard about bomb threats in Georgia, which is voter suppression, right, at its worst. And so I'm hoping that all of those instances will be fully investigated and addressed. But the fact of the matter is that Republicans caught up in the early vote. You remember the last national election, the former president was advising against uh, Republicans voting early. His position is that the only valid votes are votes that are casted on election day at the election, offices across the state. So that was part of the difference. It's a major part of the difference between 2020 and 2024. And the mail-in vote has been way down after the pandemic. So more people, as our families, Nathaniel, decided to vote in person. I voted early because in fact,
Oh my God. Okay.
Go ahead, Attorney Banks. I just muted Imhotep. Go ahead. Sorry about
I
that.
voted early, as I always do, because I wanted to make sure that I was freed up to participate in other activities, including working the early polls. And so Republicans won election day, with, I don't know if you could call it a novel strategy, but they largely bypassed traditional media and they spent a lot of their dollars on podcasts and social media and paid online creators to turn out what I've referenced as low propensity white voters, and as well as, although in smaller numbers, Black and Latino men.
Well, one of the things that bothered me is that Renee pointed out that, like in New York, how the number was lower because they put a great deal of focus on the swing state. But in reality, that's the way campaigns have always been run. If your state is not a close state, neither Republican nor the Democrat put money in that state. Like, for example, the Republicans didn't put any money in Texas because Texas, been so red. And neither Republican nor Democrat put money in California because they knew it was going to go Democrat. So that's counter. And also, what you don't forget about is that those media markets, in order to run a campaign, the cost is astronomical. You could spend $1 billion in California alone. California, one of the largest government units on the planet. I think California by itself may be the fifth largest economic market on the planet. So, in other words, so there's some extenuating circumstances that prevent a campaign from running a 50-state strategy. They could have spent $1 billion in Alabama and Mississippi and still lost by the same margin. So it wouldn't have made any difference, Attorney Banks.
From what I can see, at least initially, is that voters didn't believe that the economy was good, at least for them, and that a majority apparently trusted the former president more to fix it. And they didn't blame the former president for the COVID economic collapse. He wasn't blamed for Dobbs or the January 6th insurrection, or at least they weren't worried that he would make any of those things worse. And then I wonder whether or not all of the things that we've been saying, for example, the trashing of Vice President Harris and Puerto Ricans and others,
I know.
whether or not those working class communities are even focused on those issues at all. They may not even have been aware of those issues. And back to the point we've been talking about all along today, Democratic turnout was just okay, and Republican turnout was better, including matching Democrats in the early vote. And so this was the case throughout the country. And it was more pronounced, frankly, in some of the non-battleground states.
Okay, let's go to Imhotep. Imhotep, you had a question or comment? Hello, Imhotep?
Hello, Attorney Lee. Oh, sorry about that. I was driving, somebody cut me off, and all people drive crazy out here. Anyway, real quick, I just want to ask a question. I asked Pastor Jackson last week, okay, we're trying to move forward, and Ms. Renee brought up a great point. They've got all branches as of right now, Congress stuff. So what does MAGA ask for? I went and looked online and tried to find for a couple of days at work, what were their demands? Generally, when you vote for a candidate, you should have demands, right? So all I could find was immigration really on their table. Okay, nothing about more sick time, more vacation time. Don't touch the overtime. We saw that ruling yesterday. Don't touch public schools. We saw Attorney Banks. They had a knockdown, drag out, almost fisticuff fight in Fishers the other day because they're trying to bring a charter school in Fishers, some company out of Nebraska, and them white folk up there went completely berserk. The school board meeting was 3.5 hours. Wait till they get a hold if Congress dismantles the Department of Education, which is a part of the public school system, since they don't want charters or anything else. I mean, it was ridiculous up there. So I can't find anything. So what are they really asking for? Like Ms. Renee said, since you got everything, what are you all going to ask them for? And number two, Pastor Jackson told me that as Black Republicans, they're going to try to hold Trump accountable for that platinum plan. I forgot all about that thing. He brought up the platinum plan and the $500 billion for Black businesses. You know darn well that's not going to pass muster. Trump's not going to even. That's not going to even get out of committee if it gets to committee. What is the insanity with even thinking that you're going to go now and try to rehash that platinum plan as Black Republicans to try to hold Trump accountable to the tenets of that?
Wait a second, you need to, for the people that, wait a second, people listen, you need to explain what you mean by the platinum plan.
The platinum plan was a plan created in conjunction with rapper Ice Cube that had these 10 points of interest. 10 points of focus for Blacks and Black community. One was reform prison, jobs for felons, money for businesses, housing, various things like that. So I went and looked at it the other day, and it basically was some of the same tenets that said back then. Nothing has changed. But he didn't mention any of this on his campaign trail. He didn't mention any of this. I didn't see Byron Donald mention this one time. I didn't see Scott mention this one time. And so to me, I find it disingenuous for a pastor, Black pastor in this city, to say, well, we're going to try to hold them to this platinum plan. No, that's not what's going to, come on now. We've got to start holding our own people to the fire too. You know, we got a lot of people in our community who are anti-progress on a wholesome scale, on a holistic scale when it comes to us. But I just want you all really to think, to comment on this thought. What does MAGA want now? And what do Black Republicans, what's their role going to be for injecting whatever demands is for Black people? And thanks for taking my call.
Those are all great points. There was no plan that was articulated on the campaign trail by the former president. Only, quote, concepts of a plan, right?
Well, the only thing he said is that he's going to round up people, Hispanic folk, and deport them in mass numbers. That was the only policy that I
Immigration was a big thrust. The only comment he made regarding women and their right to choose and make decisions regarding their own bodies was that he's going to fix that, whether women like it or not. You know, so when our caller talks about some of the concerns. We heard, of course, about food prices being high and gas being high, right? But there was no articulation of an economic plan to address any issue. Again, only quote a concept of a plan. But I do think that we have to address the lack of enthusiasm and faith that some of our electorate feels that their conditions won't change based on how they're perceiving their lives on a day-to-day basis. I think we have to get to the core of that. And it's not going to be easy to establish a strategy moving forward that we all buy into, but we do need to develop a strategy moving forward. We have to have a cogent Black agenda, and we need to, chart a path with boldness. This is not the time to acquiesce. This election was what I call the end of the beginning. We've got midterms coming up, and we have a lot of work to do.
Well said. The struggle continued. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening to our show again today. We'll be back on next Saturday, of course, to deal with legal issue of the day. Also, I'm taking a survey, and I will release the results of my survey about these 8 or 9 million non-voters. We're trying to do a scientific sampling, and we will release the results. We're trying to ascertain what caused so many people that voted for Biden not to vote for Harris. We're trying to get to the bottom of this. Well, thank you all, and thank you, our VIP guests and all our callers. Thank you very much, and have a blessed day, and we look forward to talk to you next Saturday. Until then, may God bless and keep everyone. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.